What does it really mean when somebody says that the spirits of the founding fathers of the Kenyan nation want to rule the country forever? In fact, this person was more specific. He mentioned founding president Mzee Jomo Kenyatta and founding vice president Jaramogi Oginga Odinga. And by the way, this is not somebody from the deputy president's camp, because we know he has his supporters. And they always make crazy statements all the time. Actually, this is a man who in the past has very harshly criticized the deputy president. He said Deputy President William Samoei Ruto should do something about people who treat him like a god. Now, before we break this down, I believe it is important that we understand the man behind this very controversial statement made recently. 38-year-old Pastor Godfrey Mwigi has been making many controversial statements, and some on this channel will be very familiar with him. He runs a church in Kayole, Nairobi. And surprise, surprise, although he's a pastor, he's also a political analyst. He regularly analyzes Kenyan politics on the BBC Swahili service. Now, what I'm about to say is going to be very controversial, but it is 100% true. And it is this: there are very many spiritual people, or people who see themselves as spiritual, who have a huge problem with pastors, church people, analyzing politics. However, this view is not biblical, because a casual glance at the Bible or through the Bible will reveal that prophets mainly dealt with people in power, politicians. They were given messages by Almighty God for people in power. And there's something else significant to note. Usually, this happened when Almighty God was about to do something major. This pastor, Pastor Godfrey Mwigi, said something else recently that made me sit up and pay attention. He said that interfaith councils in Kenya should be abolished, and each faith should be allowed to have its own individual national prayer day. Now, those who may be able to understand these last days we're living in, and the agenda for these last days, which is closely linked to all faiths being merged into one, will understand what I'm driving at. Let me just leave it at that. Now, it is true that quite a number of major church leaders in Kenya do not have a good reputation. Indeed, the entire reputation of the church in Kenya in recent years has dramatically changed. But we also know that the Holy Scriptures tell us, you shall know them by their fruits. And the truth is, this church in Kayole, House of Hope Church, Pastor Mwigi's church, is very much involved with works that a church is supposed to be involved in, that has been missing amongst many Kenyan churches. It is a church that reaches out to the lost, thugs, criminals, prostitutes. Those who know the Kayole area well in Nairobi will tell you immediately it is not the kind of area where the typical Kenyan pastor these days would want to set up a church. Bottom line, if anybody were to take the time to examine the fruits of this very controversial pastor, they would want to pay a little more attention to what he's saying, even where they may not want to agree with him and some of his extremely controversial views. Well, I'll leave that part of this story to you. Make up your mind. But let us go back to this story about Kenya's founding fathers, Mzee Jomo Kenyatta and Jaramogi Oginga Odinga. Spirits wanting to rule Kenya forever. The second president of Kenya, the late Daniel Toroitich arap Moi, was once quoted as having said that KANU would rule Kenya for 100 years. And a casual observer of Kenyan politics would be quick to say, Moi was wrong. Shortly after he said this, the opposition toppled KANU from power, which of course is true. But it is also true that there are many analysts who will tell you that the spirit of KANU still rules Kenya today. In other words, our politics has never changed. Kenyans, of course, have been desperate for change for a long time. Indeed, at the moment, in my view, they are even more desperate for change. But that change has never come. And even when you look in the horizon of Kenyan politics, it would seem that that change is unlikely to come. In other words, the spirit of Kenyan politics is likely to rule Kenya forever. And we are talking about the foundational spirits that set up the Kenyan nation, that set up our kind of politics at independence. When you look at it this way, you will quickly realize that this statement from Pastor Mwigi deserves closer attention from Kenyans. Because as a nation, we tried very hard in the year 2002, and we thought that we had finally gotten change. We thought that we had finally toppled the spirit of KANU and the style of politics of KANU. But it was not to be. Our hopes were crushed. As Kenyans realized that although KANU was out of power, the spirit of our politics was same old, same old. And in 2010, again, when Kenyans were overjoyed at the passing of a new constitution, many believed that this was finally a guarantee that change would come into Kenyan politics. It was not to be. Indeed, as we speak, we are hearing politicians talking about things which are in our constitution as if they are mere views or opinions, which one has a choice of whether to follow or not. And so in my view, this is not a statement about dynasties and the so-called hustlers. No. These remarks were about real change coming to Kenya. Real change that impacts the long-suffering people of the country called Kenya. But the reason why I made this video was not to discourage you. It was not to discourage the Kenyan nation, to make people completely give up. No, the very opposite. Indeed, the reason why I made this particular video was to point out something very significant that is unfolding in Kenya that many have completely missed. You know, when you're bang in the middle of the action, in the heat of the moment, it is very difficult to get a different perspective of what's happening. It is virtually impossible to be able to step back and get a bird's eye view of what is actually unfolding. But let us step back, carefully consider what has been happening, since the 2017 presidential elections. The steep learning curve for Kenyans, on how Kenya really works. The exposure of corruption deals, in a way that it has never happened before in Kenya. The scandals, that have exposed many Kenyans for who they really are, well beyond the political landscape. You will realize that we Kenyans were walking on a certain road towards a certain direction. And then suddenly, around 2017, we changed direction. And we got onto this very bumpy, uncomfortable road, heading in a very different direction, from the direction we were heading before. Do you imagine that all this is for nothing? Kenyans have suffered. Kenyans are still suffering. Do you think all this is for nothing? That this bumpy road leads nowhere? I don't think so. I firmly believe now that it leads to a place called change. I don't know exactly how that change will come about. I have no idea how we'll arrive at that village finally called change. But I know we will. It is always darkest before morning. Until next time, this is Chris Kumekucha.